It's the Draft Fellows coming at you live. Kyle and Andrew breaking down the drive. Prospects to roster, we got the flow. First round picks to the ones you don't know. Talk about the combine, skills on display. Who's rising up and who's falling away. Roster building like a GM in the zone. Kyle, Fellows, Andrew Mertig, they own the phone.
Hey, welcome back to the Draft Fellows podcast. I'm Andrew Mertig. That is Kyle Fellows, and together we are the Draft Fellows. Make sure you check out our channel on YouTube, or of course, you can listen to the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform. Kyle, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing really well. We are less than a week to Christmas. There's a lot going on. Everybody's busy. Andrew, are you the person who buys your Christmas presents ahead, or are you the person who's like you're out there getting the presents right before Christmas Day?
No, I'm a big time advanced planner. Like to have all of that done and not have to worry about it.
Wrapped up. Yeah, we're done.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. I figured that was you, but I just wanted to know, like, are we in crunch time now getting that stuff done? So yeah. Same thing. Kids are done. We're ready for Christmas to roll around next week and looking forward to time with family and friends and all those kinds of things. But
Wednesday football.
Yes. Yeah. It's going to be a good time.
Just throw that in the middle.
Christmas football, right? Like that's the league is just capitalizing on all opportunities to get football in front of us and distract us from time with people.
Yeah, I think because we'll have Saturday, Sunday, Monday, no football Tuesday.
No Tuesday.
But Wednesday,
and
then maybe
Thursday. Maybe
I haven't looked at
Thursday?
next week's schedule yet.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then you have the college football playoff mixed into all of this, so football overload. It'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Andrew always sings "It's the most wonderful time of the year" when we get to the draft. But it really is the most wonderful time of the year right now, and we get to talk about the draft. So we're here to talk about what's coming up with this 2025 cycle. Last week, we worked through Andrew's top 25 list for the upcoming NFL draft. It's really fun to be rounding the corner into draft season. We'll be back next week with Andrew's next mock draft. But today, we wanted to take a look at the current top 10 draft order and evaluate which of these teams is going to be meeting their needs with the players that are available, because it's a fascinating conversation when team needs don't always align perfectly with the value and the prospects that are available in that year's class. And it's also super interesting when team needs seem to align perfectly with certain players, and maybe it's easy to see that marriage even this early on in the process, which players are going to be attractive to which organizations as they try to build their teams for the future. So we've got the top 10 teams keyed up. Obviously, the top 10 is a moving target as games play. This order is going to shift. But right now, when we've prepped this show, this is how things look. So let's jump into this top 10 here.
Yeah, and it's really, really interesting because the top 7 teams are 3-11 or 2-12. There's like no separation so far between those teams, and even 8-9 are 4-10. So there are a lot of things that are going to happen over these last 3 weeks, including some of those teams playing each other, that are going to drastically change the draft order. But as of today, the Las Vegas Raiders would be picking number 1 and taking a look at their team needs, at least the way that we perceive them. Probably quarterback for sure. That's the big one. That's the one everybody's going to talk about, connecting Shedeur Sanders with the Las Vegas Raiders. But then also perceived needs at running back, wide receiver, offensive. And that's like their whole offense, right? Except tight end, where they are pretty well set for the very distant future. Offense. And then also cornerback on defense. So, continuing to improve other areas of the roster will be just talent injection, but specifically looking offense.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think so many people made fun of the tight end pick this year because they took Michael Mayer the year before. And now it's like, looking back, it's like Brock Bowers is like the one thing that makes sense on this team in hindsight. So they got that pick. But it's going to be fascinating. Like quarterback, I think obviously is at the top of this list. This is a big quarterback team. you mentioned earlier that Las Vegas plays, is it Jacksonville next week?
I believe
In
this
their
week,
upcoming
yeah.
schedule. So the Vegas is sitting in great position to get a quarterback in this scenario, but they can mess it up if they win games here on the stretch out of the end of the season here. But I think you're right. It's probably going to be some kind of an offensive piece, probably quarterback if they have any say about it.
Yeah, so then flipping over, number 2 is the New York Giants. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you think that they are shopping for?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a situation that's very similar to Las Vegas in that, like, everybody's going to anticipate that quarterback is the top need here for this team. I think they can look at offensive tackle as well. They have needs there at tackle, and then cornerback. They could go defense and um, a player, a corner at the top of the board. I think everybody expects that Hunter is a player that could be interesting, but I think that this is a player or a team rather that is that quarterback team again. And so it's just going to be interesting if they stay at the top of the board. If they don't, and a team were to sneak above them, then maybe you have to start looking at like, okay, how do we reposition and look at something else? But right now, it feels like quarterback, offensive tackle, and corner are very stable needs for the New York Giants.
Yeah, and so like we think maybe Sam Darnold ends up in the free agent market, but
Yeah.
other than that, like what are some of these teams going to do if they strike out at quarterback? We'll talk about that in a moment. But the third overall pick as of today is the New England Patriots, and they seem to be the one team up here that has quarterback really figured out. So with Drake May going forward, they definitely need to add weapons, so wide receiver, but then also guard and offensive tackle are big needs for the Patriots. So you want to keep your quarterback upright and you want to surround him with a weapon or two. And doing all of that can be a little difficult unless you're going to splurge in free agency. So interesting to take a look at how New England is going to maneuver this, because we remember back to the Penei Sewell versus Jamar Chase debate. And you know, what are the Patriots going to do to surround Drake May with the resources that he needs to be as successful as possible?
Yeah, it feels like this whole offseason is going to be about Drake May and supporting him and making him as successful as he can be. Like what's so interesting here is like the offensive tackle just screams as a need for this team, but they might only have one legitimate offensive line starter on this team right now. Probably Michael Onwenu is probably the guy that you want on the field right now. Everybody else is kind of playing replacement level or below. Offensive tackles for them rank 72nd and 80th out of 80 for Pro Football Focus. So that's really, really bad. You'd like at least, you know, you're starting 2 offensive tackles in the NFL. That's 64. You would like, you know, you'd kind of like maybe one of them to like be in that top 64 if possible. So I really think offensive line becomes a big priority here, but it's not a secret that they'd like to add talent on the outside at wide receiver too. So it'll be really interesting to see what way they go, but it's got to be offense, you would think, for New England.
Yeah, and then number 4, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, the Jags is interesting. I think you could go a lot of different directions for the Jaguars. This is going to be a conversation with once they get to a place where they're picking a new direction with coaching and a GM, where that probably determines a lot of the direction for the team. Offensive line, I think, again, we could talk offensive line, guard, tackle, both. Corner, just secondary in general for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I think is something that they could talk about. But Brandon Scherf, Ezra Cleveland are a passable duo at guard for this team. And tackle play is probably league average. Anton Harrison hasn't been very good, but they just drafted him 2 years ago. So they probably stick with him and kind of let that play out, see if he can grow into a better player. I mentioned the defensive back possibility. They probably have something in rookie Jerrion Jones, which is a really nice surprise. But otherwise, this secondary is bad. Like the safety room just isn't working. Andre Cisco and Antonio Johnson both had pretty good seasons in 2023, but 2024 has been rough. They brought over Darnell Savage from Green Bay to play that slot robber hybrid safety role, and he actually currently grades as a bottom 5 safety in the league, according to PFF. So this is a defense that needs an injection of talent in the back end, but then also, of course, like we've talked with these other teams at the top, like offensive line is a big need as well. But I think no matter what the Jags do, it's probably about talent and culture and just bringing some guys into this building who can turn this organization around.
Okay, I'm going to force this talking point in right here because we've already talked about 4 teams. All 4 need offensive tackle help. And currently, the way that we are assessing this particular draft class is that there are a bunch of tackles, but we don't necessarily think any of them are really like top 5 picks. Maybe 1 or 2 sniffing around top 10, top 15 sort of prospects. So if you're a team and this is a major need and you need to surround your quarterback with the people that are going to be able to keep them upright, like how do you navigate this? Because you're not going to find an offensive tackle on the free agent market. You're not going to trade for one. Pretty much have to draft and develop these guys.
Yeah.
And if it's just not there, are you maybe pushing up a prospect? Are you doing everything you can to trade back? Are you waiting and taking day 3 guys and hoping that they hit? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the Patriots situation, like, I am not a Patriots fan, but like this is the one I want to see work. Like it feels like they hit the quarterback, and the next step is just like we drop in some offensive line, and maybe there will be some free agency help that's there, but like the next step feels like, oh yeah, you're gonna pick top 5, just grab a cornerstone player at tackle and roll. But there might not be that guy. Like I know there's a couple guys that people like in this class, whether it's the kid from Texas or the LSU kid that a lot of people think is maybe more of an interior player who could play both spots. But like one of those guys, maybe somebody else, they're going to get picked in the top 10, like because the NFL needs these guys. But I just don't know. Like, say if New England slides and they end up picking 7, okay, fine. Like maybe there's a fit there. But if you're picking 3 and maybe you can't justify the grade that you have on the guy at 3, like you just can't take that player just because he's a tackle. So that's what's going to be so fascinating is like all these teams we just mentioned have at least in some way a need at tackle, and they're probably, maybe we'll be surprised as we get further into this process, but right now it just doesn't feel like that guy is there.
Yeah, and really an interesting theme. Who would have thought that the teams that are really bad in the NFL don't have good offensive lines?
Yes.
It's almost like that's an important aspect
goodness.
to roster building. But this is probably the team at number 5, the Carolina Panthers, who have the best offensive line out of this group. If you're going to look at perceived needs, I think quarterback is on the list. It was like Bryce Young's a bust, and then there was 3 or 4 weeks where we were like, oh no, he's back. And then after last week's performance, he's a bust again. I don't know what to think. I think, obviously a new head coach, he is the quarterback whisperer. And so I think that is going to go a really long way in determining if they really believe they're with him 365 days a year. Like, is this the guy that we want to move forward with? Wide receiver definitely could be a need. Edge, linebacker. I think the Panthers probably need depth just about everywhere.
Yeah, I think when we identified team needs here, we said, like you said, quarterback, wide receiver, edge, linebacker. I think this is maybe one of the most interesting teams in the league because, like you said, we thought quarterback was going to be at the top of this list. We don't know. We don't know what that situation is going to be with Bryce. But at the same time, like just as equally interesting is like where things stand with wide receiver, because we don't know, like, is Jalen Coker like a thing? Like, is that going? I don't know that we know over the next couple of weeks at the end of the season if we're going to get a very clear picture of what the future of the Carolina Panthers is going to be. They're going to have to make a ton of projections within this roster. Obviously, Leggett is there as well, and this is a player that like we've seen flashes from, but like, do they have core pieces on this roster? They have to decide if those guys are already in-house. So wide receiver, quarterback, and then obviously you can add a lot of talent on the defensive side of things as well. But I think obviously Jonathan Brooks being a player that they were kind of banking on coming in and being a dynamic piece. That injury just is really unfortunate, and you hate to see them not have him. But honestly, this is a place where I wanted to throw this out there with the Carolina Panthers. And I know that this is kind of crazy because right now they're slotted to pick in the top 5. They're slotted to pick 5th at this point. But Ashton Genty is going to be a player that is going to go high in this draft. I don't know if he's going to go top 5, but this is the Carolina Panthers team that has an owner that we know, and David Tepper likes to like have his hand in things, and he's kind of done some strange things in the past to like get some star power in play. They lost a player at running back who sold a lot of jerseys, and Christian McCaffrey, and they have a young offensive coach who needs something on offense to be the identity. Like 5 is probably high, but when we were looking through these team needs, I was kind of like, maybe like with the loss of Brooks and not knowing what his career is going to be like, is Ashton Genty a player that like could be a maybe for the Carolina Panthers to do something weird in this draft?
Yeah, I don't think so because they gave the contract to Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that actually would be something that I think is kind of intriguing. But I think if you're going to draft the running back top 5, you're saying you are our bell cow. We're going to give you the rock as much as possible. And then paying Chuba Hubbard doesn't make sense. And then you have Jonathan Brooks hopefully coming back. Maybe not 100%, but coming back with a skill set that does tend to fit in well with this offense. So, I mean, never say never. We've seen some stunners before. The Saints seemed pretty good at running back, and then they drafted Reggie Bush, and then they seemed pretty good at running back, and then they drafted Mark Ingram. So we've seen offenses do this. Granted, those were a while ago, but now we see this resurgence with Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs across this league. And I do think that is probably going to push Ashton Genty up the board a little bit because teams are going to say, hey, we want that.
Yeah. Well, and I think the most recent example is Gibbs, and I think a lot of people thought that Gibbs was going to be a player that would go late first, maybe kind of flirt in the early 20s or something like that. But he went as high as he did to the Detroit Lions and has worked and has become like this dynamic player for them. So I think that there are other teams who maybe the tides will turn a little bit and there will be a little bit more of an emphasis on let's go get that playmaker. I'm with you. I don't think that Carolina would do that, but there is a little bit of that star power intrigue that's like, we don't know what our team identity is. And you add in a player like that, and suddenly you can say, okay, this is who we're going to be. Obviously the Chuba Hubbard thing is a little bit of a snag in their plan. I don't think a lot of people saw that contract coming even before the Brooks injury. So an interesting team to follow, the Carolina Panthers, as they try to kind of figure out their identity. The Tennessee Titans are next on this list. And again, these are interesting teams for a reason at the top of this board because they're all trying to figure out what the future is. I think we could talk about quarterback being a big need here for them. I think we can probably say that Will Levis, I think that we know that Will Levis is bad. I think we've kind of determined that this is the path for him. We've probably seen enough there. So quarterback is on that list. But the offensive line in Tennessee is horrific. The tackles have been pretty bad. J.C. Latham is a rookie, so they're going to stick with him and let him grow. But the guards have been bad. And this one's hard for me. Peter Skoronski is a player I loved coming out in the draft, and he has not been very impressive to this point in his career. So he's been okay as a pass blocker, pretty poor as a run blocker. I would actually, I'd love to. I think he still has a great career ahead of him, but I was surprised to see when I looked back through his PFF grades that he has not been very impressive to this point in his career. But the offense as a whole in Tennessee needs a lot of work.
Yeah, and I think you can say the same thing of number 7, and that is the Cleveland Browns. Certainly quarterback is something that they're going to look long and hard at. I don't know if they're going to want to, completely move on from Deshaun Watson. I would imagine they would rather start just about anybody at this point, but then how do you navigate the contractual obligations that you have there. Running back, this I think like 2 months ago, I linked Ashton G&T to the Cleveland Browns, and I do think that this is a potential landing spot that would be really interesting. Wide receiver is a need-ish. I think the emergence of Jerry Jeudy, the way Cedric Tillman has looked at times this year, maybe help to alleviate that a little bit. An offensive tackle as well. So really like big needs on the offense for Cleveland. I think their defense is pretty well settled, although they're going to have some major contract issues, salary cap problems coming up in the near future because they push money out so far. So it'll be interesting to see what Cleveland does.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And the New York Jets next on this list are also fascinating. Quarterback, another we're back to the Jets being in a quarterback conversation, so that's fun. Aaron Rodgers mentioning that he would be open to mentoring a young quarterback if he's still with the Jets next year. So fun narrative there. And then offensive tackle is a spot. This is a team that is kind of like taped their offensive line together for a few years just to kind of hold things in place. Morgan Moses is there, has an expiring contract after a trade, and then Tyron Smith also on an expiring contract. Both of those players 34 years old. So the Jets want to be in a spot where they can contend. I think everybody thought coming into this year that was going to be the case, and that didn't end up happening. So I think that this is going to be interesting as they flip the page into next year. Are they going to kind of tear things down a little bit and build with some youth, or are they going to try to find some more of these aging veterans to kind of plug and play and hold this thing together? I think you could also talk about tight end as a need to give them another weapon on the offense, and then the defensive line and their secondary could use some injection of talent as well. So the Jets with a big off season coming up as they try to figure out what the future is for them as an organization.
Yeah, and then currently number 9 is the Chicago Bears, who've had obviously a very rough stretch of games here. I think defensive line is a major need on defense, but please, please, please get Caleb Williams some protection. Guard, tackle, they need to invest a lot of resources there. I know that they do have 2 second-round picks as well, so it'd be interesting to see how they navigate that, but really like getting some protection for Caleb up front is going to be really important.
Yeah, the New Orleans Saints is the 10th team in this top 10, and you see a lot of team needs here for the New Orleans Saints. They could go in a lot of different directions. I think highlighting that list is probably the guard position on the offensive line. That's not a super sexy place to take a player in the top 10 potentially, but there is some talent that will be available to fit that. And then defensive line is a big, this is a good marriage here because I think that there's going to be a lot of talent on the board that fits this need. They need to get better on the interior of the defensive line. There's a couple guys coming out of Michigan you may have heard of that could be good fits for them. I think quarterback here, a lot of people aren't talking about it. They're not completely free of the Derek Carr situation, but I don't think that if the right quarterback were available, I think that this is a place where they could certainly look to the future to kind of try to figure out what is going to be our path past Derek Carr into the next age of this football team as they kind of rebrand with a new head coach and those kinds of things. So New Orleans with a lot of different directions they could go as well.
Yeah, and tons of fascinating storylines that this brings up. And we mentioned a few, right? If there's 2 top 10 quarterbacks as perceived, and several of the quarterbacks who might be in that conversation go back to college for another year, then where do these quarterback needy teams go? We talked about the offensive line challenges. If there aren't some players who over the next couple of months start to climb up the draft boards, how do these teams address their offensive line issues? We mentioned defensive line several times. I do think that there's some fun defensive line prospects in this class. Wide receiver got mentioned several times, and we don't know, exactly what the talent looks like there. Do you consider Travis Hunter a wide receiver in that case? And if not, does somebody like Tetairoa McMillan do enough from a testing standpoint that he can ascend into that stratosphere? So lots of really interesting things. And, this is the time of year where we get to start talking about this and really start to put the puzzle together between team needs and draft position.
Yeah, it's just going to be really interesting to see, these are the top 10 teams as they currently sit. These teams are going to move around, but these teams are generally going to be your top 10 picks. And so how this all settles out is going to be fascinating over the next couple of weeks of the NFL season. But we appreciate you tuning into the show today. We're going to be back next week with Andrew's next mock draft. Looking forward to that one. He's teased me with a couple of the picks that he's got going, and they are spicy. So you're going to want to tune in for that mock next week. Hope you enjoy your Christmas, and we'll catch you then. But thanks for joining us. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show. From the draft room to the gridiron, the Draft Fellows have got you covered. Until next time, stay tuned and stay in the game.
Kyle got the insight, Andrew brings the heat. Breaking down the roster every single week. Catch us on the podcast, we coming through your speakers. Top picks for practice squad, we got the seekers. Team dynamics, contracts, and the trades. From the draft day excitement to the accolades. Draft fellows on the track, we gone strong. Analyze the plays, we can't be wrong. From the 40-yard dash to the longest throw. We talking pro ball, yeah, you know.